Hi and welcome back to part 4b of the Style Creator for Beginner series. In part 4a, I went through the quantize function from within the channel edit section. In part 4b, I'll try my best to go through the rest of the options within channel edit that are available to us. And I say try my best, because whilst I am familiar with Style Creator, there are portions that I'm not 100% sure on. Yamaha don't tend to have full support for Style Creator, and the manuals that are available can be extremely vague and sometimes too vague. So a lot of the time, I'm having to spend a great deal of time experimenting within Style Creator to suss out how each function works. There are one or two functions within Channel Edit that are a little bit baffling, but they also tend to be very niche, and perhaps that's why there's very little information available. But I'll try my best to go over them in as much detail as I can. A lot of the time you can hear the changes that are being made, but for me it's also important to understand exactly why and what the changes are. So as you can see on the channel edit screen here, we have quantize, which are covered in part 4a. So that then leaves us groove, dynamic, velocity, bar copy, bar clear, and remove event to go through. I'll start off with looking at the groove option. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I always stress how important it is to make sure that when you want to apply a change of sorts, make sure that target channel is set to the relevant channel that you want to alter. The exception here is groove, because groove affects all of the channels at the same time, although there is a similar option in the dynamic section, but we'll come to that later. So make sure to save your work before you make any changes, just in case you apply changes that later down the line you might want to undo. So for the explanation of how groove works, the Genos manual sums it up very well. The groove function simply adds swing to the style or changes the feel of the style by making alterations in the timing, and it mentions here about the clocks. If you remember on my previous video, I went through the measure the beat and the clocks, and I'll show you in a minute why this is handy to understand. But with Groove, I sort of see this as an option that's there for two kinds of users. The first is the user who perhaps has limited music knowledge and simply wants to scan through the various options to see how the style sounds are affected. And then there's a user who perhaps has a very good musical knowledge and knows exactly what changes are wanted and knows how to implement them through the Groove function. This series is aimed at beginners, and for me to explain how Groove works would not only take a lot of time to do because of all the available options, but it would likely be a lot to take in if you're a complete beginner when it comes to understanding music theory. So as a compromise, I thought I'd show you a way that you can experiment and learn the function with just a few little steps, and then it's up to you how far to take things. To do this, just start by creating a simple 4/4 rhythm using a kick, a snare and a hi-hat, and quantize it so everything's in perfect timing. Now if you watched part 4a or you already understand measure beats and clocks, this should hopefully be familiar. If I switch to step edit, you can see by the values here that we have our kick on the first beat as it shows a clock value of 0000. The hi-hat is then halfway between beat 1 and beat 2 as the clock value is 0960. If you remember from the last video, there are 1920 clocks between each beat. So 960 is half of 1920 and therefore it's halfway between the beat. The snare is on beat 2 and the hi-hat again is halfway between beats. So by looking at the clock values here, we can see that the kick is on beat 1 and 3, the snare is on beat 2 and 4, and the hi-hats are between each beat. The reason this is all relevant is because if you check out the Genos manual, you'll see that it states here that Groove makes subtle changes in the timing or the clock of the style. Therefore, I find a great way to learn how Groove works is to create a simple rhythm. Take a look at the clock values in Step Edit and make a mental or written note. Then apply various changes within the Groove section and compare the differences. Of course, it's also important to know what each function here does, but it can be really confusing if you don't understand music theory. And I don't feel that I'm at a level where I can teach that, as my knowledge of music theory is limited. But that being said, I'll show you how this method can help. We now know that the groove function is there to alter the feel or the timing of the clock values. And that's done by these options here, and we can use a combination of trying to understand the manual and a little bit of experimentation. So we'll take our short rhythm that we created, and according to the manual we can specify which beats we want to apply the groove changes to, and we have various options at our disposal just by pressing the arrows here. We have the option to change the original beat structure by using the beat converter option, and when I set the beat converter to 12, some of the eighth notes in the rhythm are altered to eighth notes triplet timing. Whilst this may or may not make any sense, this is something you can hear changing, and if you switch to step edit you can also see that the clock value of the hi-hats has now switched from a clock value of 960 to 1280. And if you remember the sheet that I made from the last video, you can see here that this confirms the eighth note triplet timing. Swing gives us 5 options, A to E. Selecting one of these options can produce a swing feel by shifting the timing of the backbeats, depending on the original beat parameter above and of course the actual beat itself. For example, if the specified original beat value is 8 beat, the swing parameter will selectively delay the second, the fourth, the sixth and the 8 beats of each measure to create a swing feel. The settings A through to E produce different degrees of swing, with A being the most subtle and E being the most pronounced. If I select Swing C, you can clearly hear the difference. So let's look at step edit. You can see that the backbeats here, which are the hi-hats in between the kick and the snare in this example, the clock value has been delayed ever so slightly as it's increased from 960 to 1200, giving us that feel of a swing rhythm. And there's one more option, and that's the fine option. This option allows us to change certain notes to play early or be delayed, and we can set whether the changes produce a minimal effect or a more noticeable effect. The numbered settings determine which beats are to be affected. Push causes certain beats to be played early, heavy delays the timings, and selecting A, B or C will produce either a minimal or more noticeable effect depending on the letter chosen. So my advice here is to have a play around. Keep the manual handy when you make the changes so you can see what changes should be applied, and switch back and forth to step edit to see the actual clock changes that have been made. Or just have a play around and just listen to the changes. Groove can be a very handy tool to have, but it definitely won't be something that everybody uses. But remember, it affects all channels, so just be careful when making changes and save all your work beforehand just in case. There is an undo function, but it's very easy to start implementing and saving changes and not be able to undo things later. I do use the groove function myself, mainly to take a style that I like and change the feel of it to create something a little bit different. It's almost like I have access to a whole new set of styles when making groove changes. So that's groove. Next we have the dynamic function, and this section allows us to make changes to the volume or velocity or accent of certain notes in style playback. The accent is an emphasis placed on a particular note or notes or chord, and this could mean the note is played louder or longer, quieter, less or more attack, etc. I have to be honest and say that whilst I can hear the effect some of these changes make within the dynamic section, I'm actually not 100% on what's actually happening behind the scenes to make those changes happen. Normally I can look at step edit and work things out, but I think for some of these dynamic settings there's more going on that I can see. The manuals are very vague and Yamaha support in this area is very limited. But anyway, when I mentioned earlier about an exception with selecting the correct target channels, this is where the exception is. Because if you look at the bottom option, we can choose to apply changes to all channels or just the target channel that we're on. So it's worth double checking this setting because it's another way to easily mess up all your hard work, especially if you haven't saved anything yet. So Dynamics gives us the option to change the velocity, the volume or accents of certain notes, etc. So let's just create a simple melody within the bass recording channel and quantize it. If I switch to step edit, I can actually see the velocity values that have been recorded when I played the melody, and here they are. The value range is 1 to 127, with 127 being the highest, and you can hear the difference. I'll change all the values to 50. Now back in Dynamics, when I flick through the different options, you can hear some of the differences being implemented. I can't find any information in the manuals of what each option actually does. You can quite clearly hear some of the differences and you can work it out, but some might not be as obvious depending on what size notes that you've used. If I select techno for instance, you can clearly hear that every other note is being played with increased velocity. If I press execute and switch to step edit, you can see now that the velocity of every other note has increased from 50 to 127. If there's demand for it, or I have any spare time, I'll see if I can suss out exactly what each option does. But a lot of the time, just flicking through each setting gives us an idea and we can often hear the changes. Like with the groove function, a good way to learn the way it works is to simply create yourself a simple rhythm or melody and have a play around with all the settings. Strength determines how strongly the selected accent will be applied. The higher the value, the stronger the effect. If you simply want to boost all of the velocity values, select a higher than 100 value, or alternatively, if you want to lower all the values, select a value below 100. Just remember though that the percentages here are relative to what the value is already. So if the value is at 1 and you select 400% boost, it's not going to take it to the max, just 400% of 1, which is 4. Expand or compress is where I get a little bit stuck. I don't fully understand the manual, and when I check out the changes within step edit that's been made, I've not quite worked out exactly what's happened. I do see some of the changes, but I'm struggling to work out the mathematics behind those changes. If I go into Live Control and select Dynamic Control, I can change the dynamics of the style in real time and you can hear the difference. I'm wondering if this setting is similar, so I do apologise for not knowing this, but I'm always keen to learn if anyone does know. By the way, if you can't see this option, you may need to select it from the Live Control section. So that's Dynamics, possibly a very niche option and not something everyone's going to be using, but the options are there for us. Velocity is a nice and simple way to increase the velocity of all the notes in one go. You need to make sure though that you've got the correct channel targeted. You can increase or decrease all of the notes by changing the slider control here. And you can always change them manually one by one if that's your preference. Next up we have bar copy and bar clear. Within each style we have up to 8 channels of recorded data. So we have rhythm 1, rhythm 2, bass, etc. Bar copy allows data to be copied from one measure or group of measures to another location within the specified channel. This can be used on the included Yamaha styles if you want to alter the rhythm channels, but the other channels aren't editable unless you're a style that you've created yourself. I'm guessing this is for a licensing or a copyright protection. An example of bar copy in use might be something like this. I'll create a style and make a simple melody and record this across 4 bars, and this is how it sounds. I like the way the arpeggiator sounds in bars 1 and 3, but not at bars 2 and 4. I can delete and re-record, or I can take bar 1 and copy it to bar 2. I select source top as bar 1 and the source last as bar 1, which in effect just copies bar 1. Then I put the destination as bar 2. So what this does here, it'll take bar 1 and basically copy it into bar 2, which can save me re-recording it. If I then decide that I'd like the arpeggiated sound over all of the measures, I can just either copy bar 1 and 2 and place that into 3 and 4, or I can take bar 3 and copy that to bar 4. Either way will work here. So I'll go with source top as 1, source last as 2, and destination as 3. That basically copies bar 1 and 2 and places a copy of 1 and 2 starting at bar 3. So bar 1 gets copied to bar 3, and bar 2 gets copied to bar 4. Just always be mindful to select the correct target channel when using bar copy. Bar clear works in a similar way, but this time it deletes the bar that we don't want. So let's say for this melody, I don't want the arpeggiated sound on bars 2 and 4 anymore. So I just select source top as 2 and source last as 2, and then I can delete bar 2. And repeat this again for bar 4. Just make sure to select the relevant target channel. Last but not least is remove event. With remove event, there's quite a few options, and this function allows us to remove certain events from a specific channel. Probably the most useful for many is a duplicate notes function. For instance, when you're overdub recording on your chosen channel within Style Creator, the Genos plays the relevant measures in a continuous loop. Quite often, whilst recording, we can end up playing through the next loop by mistake, which can lead to notes being duplicated into the same beat and sounds like this. We can also see them in Step Edit if we look. We can delete them manually from Step Edit if we want to, or we can just use the duplicate note function to remove the duplicate notes. Now the Genos is pretty clever to detect these duplicate notes, and if I quantize my work, they're easy for the Genos to spot and remove. What is impressive is that it seems to find them even when my work isn't quantized. To do this, it must have to work within certain parameters. I'm not sure what those parameters are, so I'm not sure how it decides which notes to remove. So always be mindful of this and check that the Genos hasn't removed notes that you wanted to keep. There is still the option to delete unwanted notes manually, so the choice is personal preference. You'll notice there's a lot more options within Remove Event. These may or may not be relevant depending on what you've included within your style. I'll be covering these options in more detail on the Step Edit video later in this series, as it really helps to understand the Step Edit a little bit better to see some of the changes occurring. So that's a brief overview of the Channel Edit section. In the next video I'll be looking at the SFF Edit section, and this is possibly the most difficult section to understand, but the changes made here can make or break your creative style, and it's a definite one to take the time to learn if you want to create your perfect style. So hopefully I'll see you all back in part 5.